should governments, like, ever step in when markets go wrong? I mean, it's a question that's been debated forever, right? Today we're diving deep into, well, market efficiency and market failures and, like, all the things that can really throw a wrench in the whole economic machine.
Yeah, it's funny, right? We kind of assume that markets, work like clockwork, but like in reality, that's rarely the case.
Not always smooth sailing, though.
Any.
So for this deep dive, we've got, like, tons of stuff to work with. We've got economics lectures, we've got slides, we've even got, get this, diagrams to help us make sense of it all. And there's this story about a chicken farmer, and it's wild. I mean, it involves a decision, well, a decision that'll make you scratch your head.
Oh yeah, this is it's a really interesting case, a real world example that shows how things can go haywire when markets get distorted.
Okay, so buckle up, everyone. But before we jump into those failures, those times when things go wrong, we should probably figure out what a well-functioning market even looks like. What's, like, the definition of market efficiency? How do we even measure that?
It all comes down to making the most of what we've got, right? Resources are limited, but our wants, well, those are pretty much unlimited. Market efficiency is about squeezing every last drop of value out of those limited resources so that everyone benefits, like society as a whole.
Okay, so it's about, like, maximizing that societal pie, making sure we're not wasting anything.
Yeah.
But how do we actually measure that? It seems kind of abstract, you know?
Well, we can break it down into two main types of efficiency. We've got allocative efficiency and productive efficiency. Allocative efficiency is all about making sure we're producing the right stuff in the right amounts. Like, think of it this way. You're baking a cake for a party. You don't want a tiny cake that leaves everyone hungry, but you also don't want a giant cake that no one can finish.
Yeah, you got to find that sweet spot. Just the right size cake to satisfy everyone.
Yes.
I'm with you on the cake analogy. So
Right.
allocative efficiency is about matching production to those needs and wants, right? But what about productive efficiency?
Productive efficiency is more about how we produce those goods and services. Are we using the least amount of resources possible? It's about, minimizing waste, getting the most bang for our buck.
Got it. So it's not just about making the right things. It's about making them in the smartest way possible. But how do we know if a market is actually hitting those efficiency targets? Is that where the idea of, like, perfect competition comes in?
Exactly. Perfect competition is it's like this theoretical benchmark. It's like a model, kind of like, this ideal world, how markets could work in an ideal world. Think of those farmers markets, the ones that are bustling with all those stalls selling fruits and vegetables.
Okay, yeah. Tons of sellers, tons of buyers. Sounds pretty competitive. What else makes a market, like, perfectly competitive?
Well, in perfect competition, you assume that those fruits and vegetables are they're identical. Like, you can't tell one farmer's apples from another. There are also no barriers to entry or exit. Anyone can set up a stall, or they can pack up and leave whenever they want. And everyone has perfect information about prices and quality.
Perfect information. So everyone knows exactly what everyone else is charging and, like, the exact quality of their produce. That seems a bit far-fetched, don't you think?
You're right. It's totally theoretical. But the point is, with perfect information, no one can, like, rip anyone off. Competition keeps everyone honest, and that drives both allocative and productive efficiency in the long run.
So perfect competition is, like, the gold standard for markets. But we know it's not exactly how things work in real life, right? What happens when markets, like, stray from that ideal? What happens when they fall short?
That's when we start to see market failures. These are situations where markets, they just don't allocate resources efficiently.
Okay, so things get out of whack.
Hmm.
What causes these market failures? Like, give me the rundown. What are the main culprits?
There's a whole bunch of things that can cause market failures. One major one is externalities. These are spillover effects that impact people who aren't, like, directly involved in a transaction. Imagine a factory that's polluting a river, right? That pollution harms the whole community, but they're not the ones buying or selling stuff from that factory.
Right, it's like this hidden cost. It's not reflected in the price of whatever the factory is producing, right?
Exactly. We have to consider both the private costs and benefits, those directly faced by the buyer and the seller, and the social costs and benefits, which include those spillover effects on everyone else.
So externalities create this gap between what's good for, like, the individual buyer and seller versus what's good for, the bigger picture, society as a whole. Speaking of hidden costs, what about public goods? Aren't those another source of market failure?
Public goods are tricky. They're what we call non-rivalrous, meaning one person using it doesn't prevent someone else from using it, and they're also non-excludable, meaning it's really tough to like stop people from using them, even if they don't pay.
So, like streetlights. If I use a streetlight, it doesn't make it any less bright for you, and you can't really prevent anyone from walking under it. But why do public goods, why do they cause market failure?
Because of this thing called the free rider problem, people can benefit from a public good without, chipping in for the cost. So there's not a lot of incentive for private companies to provide them. Would a company try to sell you street lighting? Probably not, right? So
Oh,
the result is public goods tend to be underprovided by the market.
got it. So we've got externalities and public goods as two biggies that can mess things up. What else is there?
Another issue is when consumers misjudge the true costs and benefits. These are what we call merit and demerit goods.
Okay, so like cigarettes. People know they're bad for them, but they buy them anyway.
Exactly. That's a demerit good. The pleasure now outweighs, the long-term costs in some people's minds. Merit goods are the flip side. Think, think education or vaccinations. The long-term benefits are huge, but people might not, fully appreciate them in the moment.
So market failure can happen because, well, because we're not always rational and we don't always have all the information we need to make good choices.
You got it. And speaking of information, another culprit is what we call asymmetric information. This is when one party in a transaction knows way more than the other.
Like buying a used car. The seller might know it's a lemon, but the buyer is, well, they're clueless, right?
Yeah, that can lead to all sorts of problems, like adverse selection. That's when the market gets flooded with those lemons because the good products get pushed out.
Okay, so we've got hidden costs, free riders, bad choices, and information problems.
Mhm.
What about market power itself? Doesn't that mess things up too?
Absolutely. When a single firm, a monopoly, controls a market, or when just a few firms dominate, what we call an oligopoly, they can restrict output and raise prices. That means less is produced and sold than would be ideal. Remember those perfectly competitive farmers markets? If there was only one stall or just a handful, they could totally dictate the price. Not good for consumers.
Okay, so market power throws off that balance of supply and demand.
Yeah.
And it can lead to like higher prices and less choice for consumers.
Exactly. And you know what? This brings us to that intriguing chicken mystery we mentioned earlier.
Wait, chickens. This is where the murder comes in, right? Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the beans.
It does. This story is all about those unintended consequences, when governments try to intervene in markets. It's a type of market distortion that can have some pretty surprising, even bizarre outcomes.
Okay, I'm hooked. What happened?
Picture this. It's the 1970s, and President Nixon, he's trying to fight inflation, right? So he decides to impose these price controls on, of all things, chicken. He sets a limit on how much chicken can be sold for.
So the government is like dictating the price of chicken. I bet that went over well with everyone.
Not so much. The price ceiling was set below the equilibrium price, where supply and demand naturally meet. What happened? A massive shortage. Everyone wanted more chicken at that low price than farmers were willing to produce.
Classic supply and demand problem. But wait, where's the murder in all of this?
Well, this one farmer, faced with selling his chickens at a loss, he did something pretty drastic. He drowned his chickens rather than sell them.
You what? That's pretty extreme. I mean, it's one way to deal with a price control problem, but wow.
It is extreme, but it really shows how distorting market forces can have some unintended and pretty dramatic consequences. This whole situation brings up the idea of consumer surplus. That's the difference between what people are willing to pay for something and what they actually end up paying. With those price controls, consumer surplus initially went up because, people were getting cheaper chicken.
But then,
Yeah,
then there was no chicken to buy, right? So that benefit disappeared pretty quickly.
exactly. And it gets worse. The price controls created what's called deadweight loss. It's like a leak in the system, a reduction in the overall benefit everyone could have gotten from that chicken market.
So even though the government was trying to like help with those price controls, they actually ended up making things worse.
It shows just how complex markets really are. Government intervention, like subsidies, can be necessary sometimes, but it always carries the risk of distorting markets and leading to consequences. Well, consequences no one saw coming. Finding that balance, that's a key.
Okay, so messing with those market forces can backfire in some pretty dramatic ways. I guess those price signals, They're there for a reason, huh?
They are. Speaking of signals, let's take a closer look at how externalities, those spillover effects, how they mess with those signals and um, impact market outcomes. Pictures can help here. Visualizing it.
Diagrams. I'm all about visuals. Hit me with those diagrams.
Okay, so picture a graph. The supply curve, it represents the private costs of production, right? When you add in those external costs, like pollution, that supply curve shifts up. This new curve, we call it the social cost curve, it shows the true cost to everyone, to society as a whole.
So the private market, it's acting like those external costs don't even exist.
Exactly. The market ends up producing too much because it's not taking those external costs into account. The difference between what's produced and what should be produced, that's the inefficiency caused by the negative externality.
Okay, I see the problem. But how do we fix it? We can't just let companies pollute, right? There's got to be a solution.
One way is to make the polluter pay. We can internalize those external costs. One way to do that is through something called Pigouvian taxes. They're basically pollution
So we
taxes.
tax the polluting activity, make it more expensive to pollute, and that should, in theory, reduce the amount of pollution they produce.
Exactly. This shifts that private cost curve up closer to that social cost curve. So now the market price reflects the true cost, including the cost of the pollution.
Pigouvian taxes, gotta love a good economics term. But we've been focusing on negative externalities, the bad stuff. What about the positive ones, where society benefits even more than the individual buyer or seller? Don't those mess with market signals too?
They do. Positive externalities lead to underproduction because the market doesn't capture those wider social benefits.
Like with education, right? The individual gets the knowledge, but society gets like a more educated workforce. Everyone wins.
Exactly. In those cases, we might need the government to step in and boost production, things like subsidies or regulations.
So just like we use taxes to fix those negative externalities, we can use subsidies to promote those positive externalities. It's all about like nudging the market in the right direction.
Exactly. Trying to get closer to that socially optimal outcome. But let's circle back to oligopolies for a minute. We talked about how they can lead to higher prices and less output. But what about their incentive to collude, to basically act like a monopoly?
Right? Wouldn't it be in their best interest to team up and maximize their profits together? Like, wouldn't that be the logical thing to do?
That's the dilemma they face, to compete like crazy or to collude. We can use game theory to understand this. Imagine a simple scenario with two firms, let's say, those big supermarket chains everyone shops at. They can either raise prices or keep them low. If they both raise prices, they both make more money.
Classic collusion. But
Yeah.
what if one decides to like undercut the other one? What happens then?
Things get interesting. The one with the lower prices wins big, they get more customers. But if they both keep prices low, they both suffer. Compared to if they had colluded, that is.
So it's a gamble, right? Like a game of chicken, almost literally given our chicken story earlier.
Yeah.
Are there like real world examples of collusion or is this all just theoretical?
Collusion happens more than you'd think. The Australian airline industry, for example, they've been fined for collusion. And even those supermarket chains, sometimes their pricing strategies, well, they seem a little too similar, if you know what I mean.
Like this constant back and forth, right? Businesses trying to make as much money as possible and regulators trying to ensure that everyone plays fair.
Exactly. And it shows how tricky it can be to regulate oligopolies. Proving collusion, well, that's tough. But let's not lump all oligopolies together. There are also non-collusive oligopolies. They find ways to cooperate without actually breaking the law.
Non-collusive cooperation. What's
Yeah.
that like?
Think of it like a dance, partners moving together without ever actually, discussing the steps. A classic example is price leadership. One firm, usually the biggest one, they set the price and everyone else follows.
So they're not fixing prices outright, but they're still like influencing the market together. They're working together in a subtle way.
Precisely. It's a subtle way to coordinate things, and it can lead to higher prices for consumers, even though it's not technically illegal. A good example is the Finnish petrol market.
Petrol.
Yes. Neste, a major player in the industry, they often set the price. And other companies like CI1, SEO, and T-Boil, they tend to adjust their prices accordingly. It's a delicate dance, and no one wants to mess things up.
So they're all like watching each other, anticipating each other's moves. It's like a high stakes poker game, but with petrol prices.
Exactly, and it shows why regulators have to be really vigilant. They have to look beyond those explicit agreements to spot those more subtle forms of anti-competitive behavior. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about a different type of market structure, monopolistic competition.
Monopolistic competition.
Hmm.
That sounds like a contradiction in terms. How can something be like monopolistic and competitive at the same time?
It's all about product differentiation.
Yeah.
Think about your local high street. You know, all those shops and cafes, they're all competing for your business,
No,
but each one offers something unique, right?
each one has its own like vibe, its own specialty. It's not like buying apples from different stalls at a farmer's market. It's totally different.
Exactly. In monopolistic competition, you have lots of firms, but each one is selling a slightly different product, and there are low barriers to entry. This means we get lots of variety and innovation, but it also means that each firm has some control over their price. Their product is it's special.
So they're not price takers like in perfect competition, but they're
Yeah.
not full-blown price setters like a monopoly either. They're somewhere in between.
Right. You got it. And that makes analyzing their efficiency a bit more complex.
Right. They've got some competition, which is good for efficiency, but they've also got some market power, which can lead to higher prices and less output.
Yeah.
So where do they land on that efficiency spectrum?
They're not as allocatively efficient as perfectly competitive markets because they're not producing at that point where price equals marginal cost. They produce a bit less and charge a bit more to maximize their profits.
So there's some dead weight loss there, some inefficiency creeping in.
There is, but here's the trade-off. Monopolistic competition leads to more variety and innovation. Think of all the different craft beers out there. We wouldn't have that same level of creativity and experimentation if every beer was, if every beer was exactly the same.
Okay, that makes sense. So we might pay a slightly higher price, but we get a wider range of choices and a constant flow of like new products and ideas.
Exactly. Monopolistic competition, it brings a certain dynamism to the market. It might not be perfect on paper, but it benefits consumers in ways that that perfect competition just can't. It's all about finding that balance.
So in the world of markets, there are always trade-offs. It's not just about chasing uh, some abstract ideal of efficiency. It's about understanding those complexities and making choices that work best for everyone involved.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that markets are constantly changing. They're dynamic systems with strengths and weaknesses. And speaking of weaknesses, there's another interesting type of market failure we need to unpack: the immobility of factors of production.
Immobility. What's that?
It refers to those barriers that prevent resources from moving to where they'd be most productive. Things like land, labor, and capital.
Mm.
Think about those skills shortages, the ones that never seem to go away.
Right, like the shortage of nurses or engineers. What causes those shortages?
A few things. Geographical immobility is one. People might not want to or be able to move to a different city or region for work. Moving can be expensive and disruptive.
Yeah, I get that. It's not always easy to just like pack up and move, especially if you have family or other ties to a particular place.
Yeah. And then there's occupational immobility. That's when workers don't have the skills or qualifications to switch jobs,
Right.
even within the same industry.
So they're stuck in jobs that don't really use their skills or that aren't really in demand anymore. That's got to be frustrating.
It is. It can be due to a lack of training or just a mismatch between the skills workers have and the skills employers need. And all of this leads to a loss of productive efficiency for the whole economy.
So this immobility, it's like a clog in the system. What can we do to fix it?
We have a few options. We can invest in education and training to reduce occupational immobility. We can also provide relocation assistance or give incentives to businesses to invest in areas with high unemployment. That helps with geographical immobility.
So it's about like breaking down those barriers and creating a more flexible and adaptable labor market, make it easier for people to move around and get the skills they need.
Exactly. When resources can flow freely to where they're most productive, everyone benefits. It's a win-win.
Right, a healthy economy needs a flexible and well-trained workforce. But we've been talking a lot about theory. Do we have any like real-world data that backs up these ideas about um, about immobility and skill shortages?
We do. The UK provides some pretty striking evidence. Studies show that over a third of adults in the UK, they lack even basic school leaving qualifications. That's double the proportion in countries like Canada and Germany.
Wow, that's a big chunk of the
It
population.
is, and even more concerning, 5 million people have they have no qualifications at all.
No qualifications at all. That must make it incredibly tough to find decent paying jobs.
Absolutely. And the problem goes beyond, beyond formal qualifications. 1 in 6 adults struggle with basic literacy and half lack functional numeracy skills.
So even basic skills like reading, writing, and math, they're lacking in a significant portion of the population. That's a huge problem for an economy that's trying to compete globally.
It is. These skill shortages, they're a clear example of market failure. They limit economic growth and contribute to inequality.
Right, because without those essential skills, people are more likely to end up in low-paying jobs with few opportunities for advancement.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle that highlights the need to invest in education and training. It's crucial.
Okay, so addressing these market failures, it requires a multi-pronged approach. We need to think about education, labor market policies, and even social safety nets.
It's about creating a system that supports individuals and gives them the tools they need to reach their full potential.
Right, because a strong economy relies on a well-educated and adaptable workforce. But let's get back to those private and social costs and benefits we were discussing earlier. Can you remind me, like, what's the difference again?
Of course. Private costs are those borne directly by the producer or consumer involved in a transaction. They're the internal costs of production or consumption, like the cost of ingredients for a bakery or the price you pay for a coffee.
Right, those are the costs that are like reflected in the market price.
Hmm.
But they don't tell the whole story, do they?
They don't. Social costs, they include those private costs plus any external costs imposed on others. Think about our polluting factory example. The private cost is just the cost of production for the factory owner, but the social cost, well, that includes the harm caused to the environment and the community's health.
So it's about looking beyond that individual transaction and considering the wider impact, the impact on everyone, on society as a whole.
Exactly. And market failure happens when those social costs aren't, they're not factored into that market price.
Right, because the market, it's mainly driven by those private costs and benefits.
Yeah.
But it's not just costs that matter. We also have to consider benefits,
Mm.
right?
Absolutely. Private benefits are those enjoyed directly by the consumer or producer, like the satisfaction you get from a meal or the profit a company makes.
So it's about like individual utility or that profit motive. But what about those benefits that spill over to others, those positive spillover effects?
Those are social benefits. They include those private benefits plus any external benefits that have a positive impact on society.
Like with education, the individual benefits from the knowledge and skills they gain, but society as a whole benefits from a more educated population. It's like a ripple effect.
Precisely. And just as the market can fail to account for social costs, it can also fail to account for the social benefits.
So we might end up underinvesting in things that generate those positive spillover effects. Like we might not invest enough in education or renewable energy because the market doesn't fully capture those social benefits. It's all connected, isn't it?
It is, and it shows why understanding the difference between those private and social perspectives is so important for identifying and addressing market failures. It's crucial.
It seems like market failures, they often arise from these discrepancies between what's good for the individual and what's good for the collective, for society as a whole. It's like this tension between individual self-interest and the common good.
You've hit the nail on the head. The market, it's driven by self-interest. It doesn't always align with what's best for everyone. That's why we need tools like taxes, subsidies, regulations, and even things like tradable permits to kind of nudge the market in the right direction. It's about finding that sweet spot between letting markets do their thing and stepping in to correct those imbalances.
Right, because sometimes markets need a little help to achieve those goals of efficiency and fairness. It's all about striking that balance.
Mhm. It is. It is. A little maintenance goes a long way. But before we get too deep into those policy solutions, I'm kind of curious about something. We've talked about, allocative efficiency and productive efficiency, but Is there another type of efficiency we should be thinking about?
Oh, good point.
I
I
mean,
mean, are there other ways to, like, slice and dice this whole efficiency thing?
there's this concept called Pareto efficiency. It's named after this economist, Vilfredo Pareto. It's a situation where resources are allocated so efficiently that that you can't make someone better off without making someone else, well, worse off.
Okay, so it's like we've reached peak efficiency, no more room for improvement without creating, like, winners and losers.
Yeah.
But how do we even know if a market is Pareto efficient?
That's where the production possibilities frontier comes in, the PPF. It's a graph, basically. It shows all the different combinations of, let's say, two goods that an economy can produce, given its resources and technology.
So it shows us those trade-offs. If we want to produce more of one thing, we got to produce less of something else.
Exactly. Any point on that PPF curve, it represents a Pareto efficient allocation. Why? Because to produce more of one good, you'd have to move along the curve, which means giving up some of the other good. Someone's got to lose out.
I see. So the PPF, it helps us visualize those efficiency limits. What about points inside the curve? Those combinations are still possible, right? I mean, the economy could be producing there.
They're possible, but they represent inefficiency. It means the economy isn't using all its resources. It's like imagine a factory that could be running at full capacity, but it's only running at half speed.
Right. We're leaving potential on the table. So Pareto efficiency, that's a pretty high bar. Do real world markets ever like actually achieve it?
It's rare to achieve perfect Pareto efficiency, but it's a useful benchmark. It helps us understand those limits of allocative efficiency. It gives us something to aim for.
Okay, so it's like a North Star guiding us towards better resource allocation. But let's get back to those market failures for a minute. Can you give me a quick like recap of those key culprits, those things that mess things up?
Absolutely. We have those externalities, those spillover effects. Remember our polluting factory or the benefits of education that spread beyond the individual.
Right, those hidden costs and benefits that mess with the market signals.
And then we have public goods, those non-rivalrous and non-excludable goods. They're prone to that free rider problem. Markets tend to underprovide things like street lights and national defense because it's hard to charge people directly for them.
And those merit and demerit goods, right? People don't always make like the most rational choices. Sometimes we overindulge in stuff that's bad for us, or we undervalue things that are good for us in the long run.
Exactly. Those unhealthy snacks, they might seem tempting now, but those long-term consequences, well, they can be pretty serious. And sometimes we put off, investing in things like education or preventative healthcare, even though the benefits down the road, well, they're huge.
And of course, we had those information problems, asymmetric information. One party in a transaction knows way more than the other.
Think about the used car market or insurance information is well, it's everything in those situations.
And last but not least, we have market power. That's when a single firm or a small group of firms, they can really influence prices and output.
Monopolies and oligopolies, they're not always, inherently bad, but they need to be watched carefully. You got to make sure they're not abusing their power.
So all of these market failures, they're like cracks in the foundation, right? They show us that even this seemingly perfect system, well, it has its flaws. They highlight the need for some thoughtful intervention.
It's about recognizing that markets, while they're, powerful engines of innovation and growth, they're not perfect. Sometimes they need a little help to reach their full potential.
Right. Sometimes those market signals, they get distorted, and we need to step in and adjust those incentives. Speaking of adjustments, let's talk about taxes. We talked about Pavlovian taxes on pollution, but are there other types of taxes that can help improve market efficiency?
There are indirect taxes, things like sales tax or value-added tax. They're levied on goods and services, not directly on income or profits.
So they're like built into the price we pay at the register.
Exactly. And they can be used to influence behavior, nudge people towards making, more socially desirable choices. Think about taxes on sugary drinks or cigarettes.
Ah, those sin taxes. They're aimed at discouraging the consumption of those demerit goods we were talking about.
Precisely. By making those unhealthy choices more expensive, taxes can help reduce consumption and mitigate some of those negative externalities.
So it's like using price signals to discourage behavior that has negative consequences for individuals or society as a whole. And I imagine the revenue from those taxes, well, that can be used to fund things like public health care,
Right.
right? Further addressing the
Exactly. Those tax revenues can be used to fund public goods or to provide subsidies for, for merit goods. It creates this positive feedback loop.
Okay, so taxes, they're not just about raising money for the government. They can be a powerful tool for uh, for shaping market outcomes. It's about using those price mechanisms to our advantage. But taxes aren't the only tool we have, right? What other what other creative solutions are out there?
One really interesting approach is using tradable permits,
Yep.
especially for tackling environmental problems like pollution.
Tradable permits?
Okay, I'm listening. How do they work?
Imagine the government sets a limit on the total amount of pollution allowed, like a pollution cap. Then they issue permits to companies, allowing them to pollute up to a certain level. So it's like giving each company a pollution allowance.
Exactly. But here's the key. Those permits, they can be bought and sold between companies.
Interesting. So companies that can reduce their pollution easily and cheaply, they can sell their permits to companies that are having a tougher time cleaning up their act.
Exactly. It creates this market for pollution reduction. Companies that can do it most efficiently, well, they profit from selling their permits.
So it's like incentivizing companies to go green,
Oh, huh.
we're turning pollution reduction into like a tradable commodity. That's pretty clever.
It is. It's a great example of how market mechanisms can be used to address environmental concerns and create, a win-win situation.
So we've got taxes, subsidies, regulations, and now tradable permits. It seems like we have like a whole arsenal of policy options to tackle those pesky market failures. But choosing the right tool for the job, that depends on the specific situation, right?
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about understanding the nuances of each market, the nature of the failure and the potential consequences of each intervention.
Right. We need to be strategic and adaptable, not dogmatic. It's about
Yeah.
using those economic tools carefully. But all this talk about market failures, it might make it seem like markets are inherently flawed. Is there anything good about markets?
That's a great question. It's important to remember that markets, even with their imperfections, they've been incredibly successful. They've driven innovation, increased productivity, and raised living standards around the world.
Okay, so let's talk about those successes. What are some of the key benefits of market-based systems? What are they good at?
One of the biggest advantages is their ability to allocate resources efficiently. The price mechanism, it acts like an invisible hand. It guides resources to where they're most valued. When demand for something goes up, the price goes up. That signals to producers to increase production. When demand falls, prices drop, telling producers to cut back. It's a self-regulating system. It responds to those changing needs and wants of consumers.
So it's like this constant feedback loop. It's always adjusting to those shifts in supply and demand.
Exactly. And this decentralized decision making, driven by millions of individual choices, it's often way more efficient than centralized planning, which can be, well, it can be slow and unresponsive.
Right. It's like the difference between like a giant supercomputer trying to manage every detail and a network of millions of smaller computers, each one making its own decisions.
That's a great analogy. And this decentralized nature of markets, it also fosters competition, which is another huge benefit.
Right. Competition is good. It pushes companies to innovate, to improve their products, and to offer competitive prices. No one wants to be left behind.
Exactly. Competition keeps companies on their toes. They're constantly trying to meet those changing needs of consumers. It's like a pressure to constantly get better.
So competition drives innovation, lowers prices, and improves quality. Sounds like a win-win for consumers.
It is. And this constant drive to innovate, that's what fuels economic growth and progress. Without competition, companies get complacent, and that leads to, stagnation.
So markets, even with their imperfections, they have this built-in mechanism to push us forward, to always be, looking for new and better ways of doing things.
Precisely. And this dynamism, it's what has allowed market-based economies to achieve such incredible progress.
Okay, so markets are good at allocating resources efficiently, fostering competition, and driving innovation. What else is on that list of market benefits? What else do they do well?
Another key advantage is promoting freedom and choice. In a market economy, individuals, they have the freedom to choose what to buy, what to sell, what careers to pursue.
Right. It's all about those individual decisions, right? Those millions of choices that shape those larger market outcomes. We're not like forced into specific roles or told what to consume.
Exactly. This freedom of choice, it goes beyond just the economic realm. It spills over into other areas of life. It fosters a sense of individual agency.
So markets, by empowering individuals, they create a more dynamic and adaptable society.
That's a great way to put it. And this emphasis on individual initiative and entrepreneurship, that's what leads to new businesses, new products, new ideas.
So markets aren't just about efficiency and growth. They're also about empowering individuals. They create a society that values innovation and creativity.
Exactly. And this human element, that's what makes markets so fascinating. They're a reflection of our choices, our desires, our ingenuity. They show our ability to uh, to cooperate, to compete, to create a better future.
I love that. Markets as a reflection of humanity. It's a good reminder that economics, it's not just about, numbers and theories. It's about people. It's about understanding those choices we make.
It is, but we can't get, too carried away with all this market praise. We got to remember those market failures we talked about earlier. They're real, and they have real consequences.
Right. Market failures can lead to pollution, inequality, all sorts of problems. That's why it's so important uh, to understand those limitations of markets. We need to be willing to step in when things aren't working.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, letting markets work their magic, but also stepping in to correct those imbalances.
Right. It's about being pragmatic, not dogmatic.
Right.
Using those economic tools wisely and carefully.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the power of markets while acknowledging their limitations, finding solutions that work for everyone. And sometimes those solutions come from unexpected places, like those tradable permits we discussed, using market mechanisms to address market failures.
Okay, so it's not about like choosing sides, market versus government. It's about being uh, pro-solution, finding those approaches that really work.
You got it. It's about recognizing that markets are they're complex, they're dynamic systems. They require attention and nuanced interventions.
Right. We need to be constantly learning, adapting, and evolving our understanding of how markets work,
Yeah.
how we can shape those outcomes to create a better world.
Speaking of shaping outcomes, let's go back to that idea of government intervention. We've talked about taxes and subsidies, but what are some other ways that governments can try to fix those market failures and improve efficiency?
Okay, so beyond those price-based mechanisms, what other tools do governments have? What else can they do?
One important tool is regulation. Governments can set rules and standards to address those market failures that arise from things like asymmetric information or negative externalities.
So, like requiring companies to disclose certain information to consumers, or setting limits on pollution levels.
Exactly. Regulations can help level the playing field, protect consumers, and promote more sustainable practices.
Right, because sometimes market forces, they're just not enough. We need to ensure fairness and protect those broader societal interests.
Exactly. Regulation can act as a safeguard. It's a way to make sure that markets are operating within certain boundaries that align with those broader social values.
But I imagine regulations can also be controversial, right? They can add costs for businesses, and potentially even stifle innovation if they're too burdensome.
That's true. Finding that balance, that's key. Regulations need to be carefully designed. They need to address those specific market failures without creating too much red tape.
So it's about smart regulation, not just more regulation.
Exactly. It's about targeting those areas where market failures are most pronounced and where regulations can have the biggest impact.
Okay, so we have regulations. What other tools are out there?
Another approach is government provision of goods and services. Sometimes the market just fails to provide certain essential things like public transportation, education, or healthcare.
Right, those public goods we were talking about earlier. The free rider problem makes it makes it tough for private companies to, to make a profit in those areas.
Exactly. In those cases, governments can step in and provide those goods and services directly. That ensures that everyone has access to those essential resources.
So it's about filling those gaps where the market falls short, making sure everyone has access to those basic necessities.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that markets, they're not a cure-all. There are certain areas where government intervention is it's necessary.
Okay, so we have regulations and government provision. Any other tools in the government's toolbox?
Another interesting approach is using those behavioral economics insights. We can nudge people towards making better choices.
Nudge economics. Okay, that sounds interesting. What's the idea behind that?
It's based on the idea that people, well, we're not always perfectly rational. Our decisions are influenced by emotions, biases, and those cognitive shortcuts. We don't always make the best choices.
Right. We're not those perfectly rational economic actors that traditional economic theory assumes. We're human.
Exactly. And behavioral economics, it uses those insights to design interventions that subtly nudge people. We can nudge them towards making choices that are, better for themselves and for society.
Could you give me an example?
Sure. One classic example is the use of default options.
Yeah.
Imagine you're signing up for a retirement savings plan. If the default option is to automatically enroll, people are way more likely to participate.
So by making the desirable choice the easiest choice, we can kind of, steer people in the right direction.
Precisely. It's about